Hello everybody, I'm Brent and welcome to another edition of my language journal. I'm actually on time this month, I guess I could say. This is probably going to be a long one. I've laid out everything that I want to talk about and I have notes on my phone, but knowing me, I'm probably going to go on tangents and this could end up being an hour or so. So please do me a favor, do you a favor, and this side, I don't know, turn on 2 times and then get back to immersion after this. All right, so what happened this month? This month was a time of like change and transition. I guess this is the first point I'd actually consider myself being stage 3 in Mandarin, whereas previously I was sort of like a late stage 2C. I've thought about a lot of things as it relates to output, as it relates to my process, as it relates to even general language learning. There's really a lot I want to talk about today, and it's why I anticipate it being long. But first I want to talk about my spreadsheet. It's historically been something that I wanted to improve. I think it was pretty good, but it had a significant number of inefficiencies that just wasted a lot of time each day. And let me switch you guys over. All right, so that's OBS, infinite loop of video. So let me scroll up here to a point where I use the previous video, or sorry, the previous sheet. This was roughly it. The spacing on Excel, let me fix that for now. You guys can see it properly. So this was the general idea, right? It's like I would have a number of rows where I can fill in the task type. I would fill in when I began the task, when I ended the task. This would calculate the total number of time that I spent on this task. And then there'd be an interim waste calculation, which was basically just the difference between this and this. And this gave me an idea of time I was wasting between tasks, because theoretically, if I'm supposed to be studying full time, any gap that's unaccounted for is waste. That isn't using passive immersion, that is. But this had a lot of inefficiencies, as I mentioned previously. It's like these task types are not automated. Like there's nothing meaningful about them except for being indicators that I should be adding these to this list of sums. So basically, I would have to come in here every single day. And given the variance in my schedule that day, so maybe one day I would watch some Bilibili, or I would do some reading. No reading here, really. But given that the positioning was different each day, I would have to come into here, change it every single day. If I did less of something one day, or if I did less of the total number of tasks each day, I would need to deduct rows. If I did more tasks, I would need to add rows. You can see how there's a lot of inefficiency here. There's nothing really automated or smart about this, but it functioned for like probably 6 months at this point, 7 months. So then this thing came along, and if you guys thought that my previous sheet was excessive or extreme, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So at first glance, this it looks neater, first of all. It looks cleaner, but this is complicated. Like there are oodles and oodles of conditional logic built into this. And let me explain the flow here. So we had the issue previously where the task marking, the task type as I called it, wasn't a meaningful indicator of anything. Like didn't automate the process. So basically what I've done is I have a bunch of different tasks that I can do. So I can watch a person on the Chinese equivalent of YouTube. I can watch a drama or a movie. I can read a book. I can read a non-book, etc., etc. Anki, grammar study. And these fall into different categories. So we have active watching, active reading, passive immersion, and then output. I had all these previously. These are the same labels as before, but I've added this new output category. Now, how this works is I come over here, and let's say I began my day with a drama. So we come over here, drama is indexed as number 2. So we put a 2. And we notice that this blurred out, but I'll get into that later. Split, no, and I'll explain what this means. But let's say I started at 9 a.m., so 9, and then I ended at 10. So keep it simple, it's an hour. This is marked as an hour, and this is here. Now what happens is this information is taken from here, it's added to the total, and then it's added to this category specifically, again, because it's indexed as 2. And then if I were to change this to 1, so again, Chinese YouTube, we would notice that this moves over here. And then there's points, and there's a lot to this system, but we'll get through it. Now, that's pretty intuitive, right? It's like you have index numbers, and you can add your index numbers here. And those index numbers allow this summary sheet to automatically pull information to be summarized. But there are different types of information that you would need from different categories, right? It's like reading a book. If I read a book, or I read a chapter, or I read something, or I do Anki, there's an additional piece of information I need from that. I need the number of characters that I read. I need the number of cards I did on Anki. And I know Anki tracks that, but I like it being centralized. Or if I'm doing any writing, I want the number of characters that I wrote that day. So book is number 3. So let's say I'm reading a book. I'm not splitting, and again, I'll get into that later. The sheet then prompts you, turns yellow with the number of characters you read. So let's say I read 1,500. It turns non-yellow, so back to white. And let's say from 10:30 to 11, I read. So 30 minutes of time. A waste is calculated. So it goes from here to here. We have 30 minutes. And then interestingly, this value is then taken, added to the supplementary stats, so 1,500 characters, and then my reading speed is automatically calculated given the total here. And this is good, but there are only a couple that you would need this for, so I think I have it set as book, writing in Anki. Nothing else will prompt you. And that's why, as I said before, if I add 2, this automatically goes gray. Written conversation, automatically gray. But if it's writing, 9, it requests that. Now, I think all that makes sense. But let's say I'm going to use the split function that I built. What is that? And I built this split function because often while I'm watching a drama or something, I'll be texting somebody. And it seemed not intentionally disingenuous, but it sort of skewed my statistics in a way that I didn't like. So let's say I'm watching a drama too. And in fact, this drama is split, so yes. And I'm doing this from 12 to 12:45, let's say, so 40 minutes of drama, or 45 minutes, sorry. But during this time, I'm doing written conversation, so this basically just means texting. So I put 11 in. Yes, this is also a split, so the sheet would then detect these are grouped together because they're splits that are side by side. And let's say this split started at 12:15, so it started partway through. And it ended at 12:45, just to keep it simple for now. So 45:30, and normally, were I to just not use the split function, these values would be calculated, and then there would be an overestimation of the amount of time that I spent. But we don't want that, right? So instead, these C totals are calculated, and these are corrected totals. So basically, these are the numbers that are then pulled into this sheet and added to each category. So while I spent 30 minutes technically texting, it doesn't deserve my full attention. Instead, it's split between this, and I get half of these points, or this time, but again, points, which I'll get into later, added to this here. So I have 15 minutes. And then there's also, again, oodles of conditional logic. If this is no, this then turns blue to indicate that there's probably an error. The green just indicates that this is my highest total for the day. So it's sort of like a, I don't know, it's something to try and beat. Maybe add some positive reinforcement to hard work. But I think we're on the same page. Oh, one more thing, because I want to show off this conditional logic, so I put a lot of time into it. Let's say that this is 12:30, so I spent 15 minutes. And then another task comes along. Let's say I do some grammar study. This is not split. And I start this at 12, or let's say 1 o'clock. Now, normally, this waste value, or previously rather, would just take the previous value and calculate the waste. But you can see how that would be incorrect, because while the last value is technically 12:30, I stopped doing tasks at 12:45. So I had to write conditional logic that detected which of these is the greater value and use that instead. So lots of this. I'll probably add this sheet in the description as well if you guys want to play around with it. But let's get into the point system, which is my favorite part of this. The point system it's something I added after noticing that, again, not intentionally or not disingenuously, but I was trying to sort of gimp the time system that I used before. So it's like maybe I wanted to study 12 hours a day, but it's obvious, or it's obvious to me that these activities should not be equivalent in terms of value given to me. And thus, if my goal is to reach 12 hours in a day, perhaps then I'm going to unintentionally gimp the metric, basically, by doing more passive immersion. Because again, we're all cognitive misers. I've mentioned this before, and you unintentionally try and save effort. So I thought, what can I do about this? Some things are more valuable, like reading is more valuable. Shadowing is more valuable because I'm improving my accent, etc. Certain things are less valuable. It's like music is obviously not equivalent to book reading, whereas it previously was. So what I did is I added a point system. And this point system is pretty simple to think about. Basically, all it is you have these values here, and then these values are then multiplied by the number of hours that you have per category. And then that gives you the points per category, and then the points per name, and then the points per category. And then all those are summed up. And then I have a goal that I need to hit every single day. It's currently set at 12. I'm experimenting a bit before I do what I'm about to talk to or talk to you guys about. But maybe a bit lower. This is like a minimum. And then this is how far I'm away from 12. And then every point above 12, I want to then be able to add those up for something, again, I'm going to talk about. But this is, let's call this precondition 1 for the thing I'm going to talk about. And then this is precondition 2, okay? I didn't mean to change that. What is this here? These are the minimums per category or per name. We can call them maybe type or activity type. These are minimums per activity type. So I can set these, again, over here. And it's simple. It sets a minimum that I need to do each day in each category. And then, so there are 3. This is calculated. I can't actually see this because of my light. So let me open this up. Then we can see if I were to change this to 0, we would see this go away, and then this goes to 0 out of 2. But we do want that. And then currently what I've set are 3 minimums. So I need to be doing an hour of books per day, an hour of grammar study, and an hour of spoken or an hour of accent practice, which is shadowing, and that should actually be, I just changed that yesterday, which again, I'll explain later in this inevitably very, very long video. So all these are added up, And then we have two preconditions, so 1 and 2. Now, this is where the psychology comes in. This is a meaningless metric unless I am actively making changes in my life based upon it. So we have the point system. And then the point system is every point above 12 is added to a bank. And then as I gain points, I can then use those points for things in my life. And I don't know what I'm going to put those towards necessarily. Maybe ordering food from like a restaurant or something. It's like I can work towards a goal. And then the more work I put in, the more points I gain, etc. But as well, I'm going to be adding a stipulation that if the minimums are not met in that day, regardless of how many points I got in that day, I failed. So this is a necessary condition for me to get the points. And if I don't get the points, I'm probably going to punish myself in some minor way, because you need some sort of disincentive. Like, I don't know what that's going to be. I'm still thinking about it. But I'll let you guys know next month once I've sort of flushed this out. But that's the sheet, basically. So a bunch of tracking. Let me just show you this. So if I add another grammar study, so no 1230 to... Actually, let's just change this to 1500. So we see that goes green. Now this is 1 out of 3. So it's pretty simple once you get the underlying logic in it, but this is one major innovation I've had this month that actually took a fair bit of time to implement in an effective way. All right. Okay, let's move on. I don't know how long I'm going here. Yeah, so you guys can see me now. Let's see how long the video is. Oh, 16 minutes. We're doing okay. All right, let's talk about journaling, because I said I was going to journal every single day for forever, something like that. I didn't journal every day forever, and that was intentional because I found that given the lack of variety in my life, journaling actually wasn't a good writing practice. Like, if you live an exciting life and you're doing a bunch of different things, there are significantly more nouns and verbs and adjectives that you can use to describe everything. But when your life is basically you're locked down due to COVID and you're studying Chinese all day, every day, there's the breadth of topics that you can discuss is pretty minimal, or are pretty minimal. So I decided that really wasn't worth my time, and I have this writing instead, which I'll talk to you guys a bit about. Another thing that I started and then stopped intentionally, which is probably worth bringing up because people have asked me about habits before and how do you build effective habits. I have like a makeshift gym nearby, like 10 steps away from me, and I wasn't using it as much as I might otherwise want to. So I thought, okay, there's clearly an issue here, because accessibility is not the issue. It's a matter of habit building and motivation. So what I did is I got a piece of paper and I drew a bunch of boxes. I don't know if you guys can see that. I hope so. So basically just a bunch of boxes. It's supposed to be like a makeshift calendar with rather unequal boxes here. And then each day I would need to go to the gym, and the minimum that I would need to do is sweat. Doesn't matter the intensity of the workout, as long as I sweat rather, English, I could stop and quit. And it took about 10 days or so of using this sheet for me to just say, okay, it's not worth using this sheet anymore because the habit's been built. I can wake up every morning and go and do that without any sort of like habitual difficulty or anything of the such. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I think something similar can be used for whatever language you're learning. If you set a minimum, it's like, let's say you want to do grammar study or you want to watch a drama, perhaps it's enough to set the goal that you're not going to do 3 hours of watching drama per day. Instead, you're going to open up a drama every day and you're going to watch 2 minutes. Because once you've reached that point, you've got over the difficulty. The difficulty is starting. The difficulty is starting that task. So once you've you've reached that point, the likelihood of you stopping decreases substantially. And so you can thus reduce the mental hurdle of being productive while still being productive. So that's an aside, something I wanted to mention that I thought might be useful. But this is going to be the bulk of the video. And this is going to be more theoretical. I have a lot of thoughts, analogies, and stuff that I've put together. But this is going to be hearsay in the Refold community. But I'm no longer completely convinced that immersion is sufficient to reach a high level in a language. And this, to me, was a rather dramatic change in mindset. I still think, and let me preface everything, I still think that if there were a correct way to learn a language, Refold is by far the closest. I think that prioritizing immersion, in particular building a base, is where you need to start. But yeah, let me elaborate, perhaps. Okay. So we've swapped you over, good. I took a course in university, a developmental psychology course, that made the distinction between spoken and written language. And I'm going to read this paragraph out for you. If young children are raised without a native language, but raised in community with other children, they will invent a native language, and the language they invent will be every bit as complex and human as any other human language. Unlike agriculture, fire, and written language, spoken language is not an innovation. So spoken language is something inherent to us, right? Written language isn't. The history of written language is such that it's relatively new. It's an innovation, hence the term was used. But the assumption is, in Refold, and this is not criticism of Matt or Ethan, this is just me thinking. I really appreciate what they've put together, obviously. But and they may even agree with this to some degree. It's not obvious to me that you can reach a high level and deep understanding of a language without actively studying it and developing an active understanding of the mechanics. Because I've heard the argument used before that children can reach a high level in a language without actively studying it. It's like through using osmosis is an analogy. But I don't know if that's entirely correct, right? It's like children go to school. Every example of a child we've seen that hasn't like actively been educated in a language is basically nonverbal. Like a famous example in psychology is Jeannie. It's an unfortunate case of a young girl who was locked in a room and only spoke with her parents, and she was like tied to a chair. It was like horrific, but it was studied a lot in psychology. And she never developed the ability to speak a language, and not at least to a high degree, like very, very basic. And so I think it's such that immersion alone is sufficient to develop an understanding and an intuition in a language, and perhaps an intuition for the grammar, but it's not such that you can then produce the grammar in a consistent and systematic way. So while you can, if you speak to a child or you speak to an uneducated person, they technically can speak the language, but they can't reliably put together grammatical patterns that would be correct. And this is something I thought about. And from these thoughts, I came to the conclusion that I need more active study in my learning. Close my sheet. It's like, here's an example that might be salient for Chinese learners, and I'll make it such that it's applicable to everybody. Just making sure you guys can see me here. Good. Okay, so let's this and this. Make it a bit bigger for you guys. 50. So this is he, sh, and sh, he. Now, you don't need to be able to read Chinese to see that these are the same characters flipped. And it took me basically up until the point where I discovered this, so like, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that, to realize that these are different words and they're used in slightly different ways, yet they convey a very similar meaning. And I would ask you, like, if you're part of the Chinese community, do you know how to use these separately? Did you even know that these existed? Like, this is an adjective, he, sh, whereas sh, he is it's a verb. Like, somebody is this. It's fitting to me, whereas this is more like it's appropriate. But anyways, the point is, without active study, I never would have figured that out. And maybe years down the line, some native speaker would correct me, and I would then be able to understand this difference. But I don't know. I'm skeptical. I don't think a deep understanding comes that organically. And in particular in adulthood, I don't think it comes that organically. You need to, and to perhaps connect this to back to Refold, I think you need to develop a strong base in the language. And then to draw in Steve Kaufman's analogy that he used in an interview with Matt, it's like you need to go through the forest, you need to walk the forest before you can then take directions in the forest. It's like if you're going into the forest, or before you go into the forest, somebody tells you, yeah, just go 500 meters, turn right at the tree with an axe hanging from it, and then turn left at the red ribbon. It's like you're not really going to know what that means until you've actually been there. So you need to build up a base, which is what I think Refold gets right. But you then need to do active study. Or something being wrong. And like that brings me into this idea as well of you can develop an awareness and strong intuition for the language. And this is something I noticed when I first started outputting. I knew that the sentences that I was producing were atrocious, yet I was incapable of fixing them. It physically pained me to type or to type, yet I didn't know why it was wrong. I just knew that it was wrong. And that's like the childlike intuition that I had mentioned previously. So you develop that through immersion, and then you learn where the red ribbon is, and then you learn why the red ribbon is there and how to place the red ribbon if you were to signal in the future, to perhaps build on that analogy a bit more. And then another analogy to perhaps help you guys think about this. If the idea is such that you can learn a language just through input of native speaker, because I guess that's the idea. It's like a little bit of grammar practice, and then you go out and native speakers will correct you, whether subtly or unsubtly. But if you're dealing with Chinese people, probably subtly. You don't really have any outcome measures. And I use that word because I think about it in like the sense of a neural network, because your brain is basically a neural network, and that's why neural networks in an algorithmic sense are called neural networks. You have all these nodes that connect, and the degree to which nodes connect and unconnect or disconnect are based upon an outcome measure. It's like the reduction of error in predicting something. And if you think about that in humans, the only reason that we can learn is because we have a a very, I guess the term I was going to use, and I was trying to think of a simpler way to put it, is because you have, as a behaviorist would put it, you have temporal contiguity. It's like this idea that close in time, two things occur together and make it such that you can learn. But when you're dealing with a native speaker, I don't think you're getting that feedback often enough to be able to correct it on your own. And it's like there's the reliability and sustainability of that as well. It's not feasible to have a native speaker correct all of your mistakes except over ridiculous spans of time, like maybe 20 years. And maybe that takes that long to learn a language to a high level, but maybe it also doesn't if you combine the right building blocks to create something of an efficiency. So there's that idea. And yeah, so I just don't think it's sustainable to learn exclusively from native speakers through correction. All right, so now let's get into my experience of outputting. As I mentioned probably like 5 minutes ago, it was quite atrocious. I haven't actually done any spoken output really yet, but I've done written output. And the sentences that I produced at the beginning in particular were quite bad and quite embarrassing for somebody who's been learning for so long. I was quick in getting to a point where I can now hold a conversation with a person over text and talk about a variety of things while looking up certain nouns and verbs, because I think that's a limitation that I currently have. My vocabulary isn't expansive enough. But, and that did happen quickly, so I developed the base and it happened. But it also happened through a lot of concerted study of grammar. And that brings me into this idea of how I plan to study now and how it's going to be significantly more concerted. I found a grammar textbook that's quite good. Now I'm going to, because I think it's so old and it's online for free, hosted on some publication website, that I'll put it in the YouTube description so you guys can all have it. It's not overly short, but it's not overly long. But this is the map of the forest. If we do refold and we develop an understanding or an intuition for the language, this helps you understand that intuition. It helps everything click. It's just a series of chained together eureka moments, essentially. And so what I've thought, and the way I've thought about this, is, have you guys heard of and this is rhetorical because obviously you're people on the internet, have you guys heard of the book, The Little Prince? It's historically, I guess you can just look at me at this point. It's French, but it's been translated to probably most languages, and I think most people have heard of it. It's like this child travels around to different planets in space and encounters a bunch of adults who each represent a trope of adulthood. And it said that a person should read The Prince at 3 points in their life. Or The Little Prince, sorry. The Prince is a very different book. So the Little Prince, the Xiaowangzi, a lot of interference there in terms of the word. But you're supposed to read it in your childhood, in adulthood, and then, I don't know how to put this, like before you die, I guess, when you're a bit older. Because you have very different information that you carry in with you, the baggage that you carry in helps inform the opinions in what the opinions that you have of this and the information and takeaways that you derive. So as a child, it's a story of adventure. As an adult, it's an adult. And I read this like probably a year and a half ago, and it changed how I see the world, particularly when he visits the bean counter. I don't think he's actually counting beans, but it's the guy who's very serious, and he's counting things, and he counts up And it just made me realize that that's not who I want to become, but that's a tangent for another day. The point is, you need to go in with different information each time to have different takeaways. And then we come back to this grammar book. I propose now this idea that you should read this book at least at 3 different points in your studying of Chinese. You should read it at the beginning. You should read it at least once before you go into stage 3, or probably twice, and I'll get into that. And then you need to read it again when you're maybe going into stage 4, I don't know, at some point later on. But the reason I say you need to read it twice, or I'm going to read it twice, you can do whatever you can do whatever you want. I'm going to read this twice. The first time as a cursory overview. This is just me skimming it. It's taking the takeaways that stick, throwing, I don't know, what do you throw at a wall? Like paint at a wall and seeing what sticks. Throwing like, I don't know. It doesn't matter though. You throw something at a wall and you see what sticks. Oh, I remember what it is now. I won't say that. And then the second time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and derive a lot more conscious knowledge. Like I'm going to create an Anki deck based upon all of these takeaways and try and make it as applicable as possible. So first time is an overview. Second time is to create active knowledge that I can then rehearse in a repetitious manner. And that's what I'm trying to do with this. And it's been incredibly helpful. Highly recommend this. Highly recommend conscious grammar study, particularly before you go into output, because I think that's when it has the most value for you. Okay, language parents. I've now picked a language parent. Outlier. Yeah, that's for later. So I've picked a language parent, and one thing that I've noticed is that I don't think I have the conscious knowledge yet about Chinese to begin shadowing properly, because I've done a bit of shadowing. And while I can try and imitate what I'm hearing, I think having conscious knowledge about what the individual is doing with their mouth to produce those sounds is in fact helpful. So what I did is, sort of following the theme of the grammar study, I was recommended a course by a friend in the Discord. And the course is this here. It's Outlier, Mandarin Pronunciation and Accent. It's not cheap. And I don't know if it's worth it for a lot of people, to be honest. But I found it pretty good. It's not revolutionary knowledge. It's sort of like all of this is free, but you're paying for the convenience of all of it being consolidated. And one of the key takeaways that I learned is how tones tend to vary when words get stuck together. It's like you can pronounce all of them in isolation, but the tone variation is what is going to allow you to sound more natural and in fact be understood in some cases, because the tones vary to such a large degree that you just might not be understood. They say, and I don't know how much of this I should give away out of respect for them and them trying to market a course, but the general idea is just that you should listen to all the different possible combinations of tones to see how they interact. And that's the takeaway, and I found that useful. And what they say is you should do that in Audacity here. Let me turn this off so it doesn't come through my speakers. And then Audacity here. So this is what I've been doing. And I'm going to do this whole idea that you can stick tones together, because they have a bunch of examples of that I plan to listen to. But this is my language parent here. And I use Audacity basically as Matt recommended in his video that he posted 2 years ago. Audacity is good. You just get audio from your parent. This is a useful tip. You take this tool right here. You highlight a certain portion of the audio. You hold shift and you press this, and then it'll just loop it over and over. You guys can hear that. But the general idea is you want to be able to listen to this in the least or the most convenient manner possible. And I think this is the software that does it. It allows you to just loop the audio over and over so you can repeat it. It allows you to cut down certain parts of the audio. It allows you to slow it down. You can apply compressors to it. It's like Control A to highlight everything. Come up to 效果, which is just like effectiveness, or the effect rather, effects. And you put a compressor. You can adjust audio if it's unbalanced. And I actually used this here to create the passive immersion audio that I use. So if we come, nope, not frequency, share X, this here. I went through the show that my language parent's from, and I took all the snippets of them speaking for more than 20 seconds. And then I put them all together in Audacity. I applied a compressor so they're all roughly balanced, and then that's what I listen to for my passive immersion. It's quite good. It's what I'd recommend you guys to do if you can't find a prolific parent, as is recommended in Refold. Although this guy is somewhat prolific, but I really had a difficult time finding a... Just make sure you're transferred over. Yep. I really had a difficult time finding a parent who has substantial amounts of audio that's just extended, because podcasting isn't really that big in China, and it's not like the West, at least. That's why I couldn't find that. Basically, my parent is an announcer for the Chinese Central Television. I think that's what it's called in English. But anyways, he's a host, announcer, like sort of like a personality for that. And he's on a bunch of different shows. He has a great standard accent. I like his personality as well. He's a person I can sort of see myself not becoming. It sounds weird, but it's like I can see myself mirroring certain parts of my personality, or mirroring certain parts of his personality, etc. I'm sure you guys get what I mean here. All right. I think that's it. I don't know if I'm missing much. So I covered my tracking sheet. I talked about how I plan to go about language learning going forward, which with a lot more concerted study. My parent. Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe goals going forward I can talk about. I plan to, again, continue this monthly. I plan to start outputting in conversation, probably in like 2 or 3 weeks. I'm keeping up written conversation, basically daily with multiple people. It's good practice. And the reason I've pushed back spoken conversation, because the idea was to originally do it at the beginning of this month, is because I didn't feel that my accent and my ability to construct sentences was where it needed to be for me to begin outputting. And like, there's the original difficulty and discomfort that you feel when outputting, and it wasn't that. It was just I was unprepared. But I think after finishing this textbook, I should be at a point where I can on the fly construct sentences. Oh, actually, yeah. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about, and I think this is interesting. So if you were just interested in like me and what I'm doing, this is probably where you would click off. But I have one more topic that's maybe, it's a bit more abstract, but some of you may find it interesting if you like language learning. It's the idea And I'll try not to pile on too hard here. It's really not my intention. But I've heard multiple polyglots describe language as a tool where you use it to communicate a message, and it's like, yeah, that's a fine description, but it's often the case that and I would imagine it's such that if you view language as a tool, it's probably the case that you're not a very good conversationalist in that language, because there's a lot of nuance in how to use that tool that dictates the level of interest that a person's likely going to have in what you're saying. And I noticed this in the conversations. While I can communicate a message and express a point, usually there's a more concise way, or there's a more flavorful way, colorful way that I could have expressed that message, such as to make it more appealing to the person receiving that message. And it's like in English as well. You can walk up to a person and ask, "How are you doing today?" And they're probably going to be taken back a little bit, like if a native speaker says that to them. And they won't say anything. They'll say, "Oh, I'm fine." But that's all you're going to get. You could instead express that as, "Oh, how you doing today?" Or "What's up? What's up?" Things like that. It's awkward when I'm saying it while staring into a camera in front of a mic, but you guys know what I mean. There's non-formal ways, colloquial ways of expressing ideas that make them more appealing. And that's a difficulty that I've noticed, and it's something that it's just a barrier, basically. It's something that I've thought about, and it's sort of been latent knowledge after I read an experience that Rosen had in the community, the Chinese Refo Discord community, where he felt like he couldn't be the best version of himself, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting how he feels, in Chinese, yet he could still have a conversation. And I sort of feel that it's like there's nuance. I feel like I can be a more interesting person in English than I can in Chinese, because I have more social experience in English. So I hope that's something that improves, and it sort of connects to, again, the idea of language being a tool versus being a way of being. If your goal is to just communicate a message, you're probably not going to be that interesting. Instead, what you need to aim to do is adopt the characteristics that are typical of a native speaker, and be able to communicate and say things that a native speaker would say. But anyways, I don't want to rant too long. Okay, my notes are done. Let's see how long I went here. Kept it under an hour. Nice. So I hope you guys watched that on 2x speed. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I'm coming back to the Discord now. my leave of absence is gone. I like you guys too much to leave for too long. But yeah, thanks for listening. Take care. Have a great morning, evening, or night, and see ya.